Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that quietly unravels everything, not through a missing fossil, not through a disputed date, but through the simple, unsettling question of who the first humans actually were. This is the video we called, What If the First Humans Were Nothing Like Us, and We Were Wrong? And I think you already feel it, that low hum of doubt that maybe the story we were handed wasn't the whole one. Before you settle in, hit like and subscribe, genuinely only if this is your kind of thing. A big thank you to Jessica Allen from Minnesota for suggesting this one. It's the kind of question that sounds simple until you try to answer it. Comments like hers are why this channel keeps going somewhere interesting. Drop a comment. Where are you listening from? What time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe pull a blanket up, and just know that your middle school history textbook might owe you an apology. Because after tonight, ancient human might mean something entirely different. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered why we assume the first humans thought like us? What if they didn't fear death the way we do, or love the way we do, or even recognize themselves in a mirror? And here's the quiet one. If they were that different, at what point did we actually begin? Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast, ancient forest, so dense and old that sunlight barely touches the ground. The air smells of wet earth and something you cannot quite name. You are not lost. You are, somehow, home. But nothing around you looks familiar. That strange feeling, that pull between recognition and mystery, is exactly what scientists experience when they dig into the origins of our species. For generations, we were taught a clean, comfortable story. Humans evolved in Africa, spread across the world, and replaced everything that came before. Simple, linear, satisfying. But the deeper researchers dig, literally and figuratively, the messier and more magnificent that story becomes. Here is something remarkable. Recent genetic studies have revealed that modern human DNA contains traces of at least 3 or 4 distinct ancient populations that we once thought were entirely separate species. We did not simply replace them. In many ways, we became them, and they became us. Think of it like a family recipe passed down through generations. You may call it your grandmother's dish, but inside it are flavors contributed by neighbors, strangers, travelers, and people whose names you will never know. Our genome is that recipe. Scientists now believe that what we call the first true humans may have been far more diverse, far more widespread, and far more interconnected than our textbooks ever dared to suggest. They were not a single tribe marching forward. They were a mosaic. And here is the quiet wonder in all of this. Every time we discover we were wrong about our past, we learn something truer, something richer. Our origins are not a straight road. They are a living, breathing forest, and we are still wandering inside it. Picture yourself lying on a hillside on a moonless night, far from any city, far from any noise. Above you, the stars are so thick and bright they look like spilled salt on dark velvet. Your heartbeat slows, your breathing deepens, and for one rare moment, time feels enormous. Now imagine that same hillside 300,000 years ago, with someone lying exactly where you are. Different face, different language. No language at all, perhaps, but the same stars, the same chest rising and falling, the same heartbeat. That connection is not poetic imagination. It is biological fact. The human heart has not meaningfully changed in hundreds of thousands of years. The rhythm, the chambers, the electrical pulse that keeps us alive today, it is the same architecture that kept our most ancient ancestors breathing through ice ages, migrations and extinctions. Scientists studying the fossilized remains of early Homo sapiens and their predecessors have found hearts that functionally would not look out of place in a modern operating room. The cardiovascular system we carry inside us is ancient technology, refined over millions of years, and it has not needed much updating. Think about what that means. Every time your heart beats, It is performing a movement that has been performed continuously across an unbroken chain of living creatures, stretching back further than the human mind can comfortably hold. You are not just yourself. You are the latest pulse in a rhythm that began before our species had a name. There is something quietly humbling about that. We spend so much energy thinking about what makes us new, what makes us modern, what makes us advanced. But perhaps our greatest inheritance is not our technology or our language. Perhaps it is simply the steady, faithful beat that keeps us here, moment after moment, connecting us to every ancestor who ever looked up at the same stars and felt the same stillness. Suppose you received a letter one day, addressed to you personally, but written in a language you do not recognize. The handwriting is strange, the paper is impossibly old, yet somehow, without being able to read a single word, you feel certain it was written by someone who loved you. That is, in essence, what ancient DNA feels like to geneticists. In 2010, scientists completed the first full sequencing of the Neanderthal genome. What they found quietly shook the world of anthropology. Somewhere between 1% and 4% of the DNA carried by people of non-African descent today comes directly from Neanderthals. These were not just our neighbours. They were, in the most literal biological sense, our relatives. But the story deepens. In 2008, a finger bone discovered in Denisova Cave in Siberia revealed an entirely new group of ancient humans, now called the Denisovans. People of Melanesian and Aboriginal Australian descent carry traces of Denisovan DNA, sometimes as high as 5%, and researchers believe there are others still unnamed. Ghost populations, scientists call them, ancient groups whose physical remains we have not yet found, but whose genetic fingerprints linger inside us like messages written in that unreadable language. Here is what strikes me most about this. For centuries we imagined human prehistory as a competition, a survival race where only the strongest lineage endured. But the evidence suggests something far more tender. Ancient humans met, formed relationships, had children together, and carried each other forward. Our hidden ancestors are not lost. They are woven into us, into the colour of our eyes, the curve of our brows, perhaps even the way our immune systems fight disease. We did not conquer the ancient world. We absorbed it, gently, quietly, and it became part of everything we are. Let yourself drift into a thought experiment for a moment. Imagine you are an archaeologist kneeling in the dust of a Moroccan hillside and your brush reveals a jawbone. You expect it to be old, maybe 100,000 years old, maybe 150,000. But as the dating results come back, the number on the page makes you sit down slowly in the dirt. 315,000 years old. That is what happened at the site of Jebel Irhoud in Morocco in 2017. Fossils discovered there pushed the known origin of Homo sapiens back by nearly 100,000 years. In a single announcement, our species became significantly older than the scientific community had believed. And yet, the bones themselves were not what anyone expected of the earliest humans. The faces were flatter than modern humans, more ancient-looking. The brain cases were elongated rather than round. These were people in the middle of becoming, caught at a moment in our evolution that we had never seen before. Think of it like finding an early draft of a novel you thought you knew by heart. The characters are recognizable, but the sentences are unfinished. The story is still forming. What does it mean that we keep finding our ancestors older and farther back than we thought? It means the story of humanity is not closing, it is opening. Every discovery adds more room to a past that refuses to be neatly summarized. We are not the end point of a brief journey. We are a single chapter in a story that began so long ago, the first page has not even been fully found yet. That is not a reason for anxiety. It is an invitation to wonder. Our roots run deeper than our proudest histories dare to admit. Imagine holding something very small in your hands. a bird's hollow bone perhaps, or a smooth river stone. Nothing about it announces its significance. It is quiet, understated, easy to overlook. Now imagine that this small, quiet object is 3.5 million years old, and it once belonged to someone who walked upright, who cared for their young, and who perhaps looked up at the sky and felt something we might recognize as curiosity. Fossils speak a language of understatement. They do not shout, they whisper. The silent bones of our earliest ancestors have been found in fragments, scattered across the African continent over more than a century of careful excavation. A knee joint here, a fragment of skull there, a handful of teeth. Each discovery forces scientists to revise and rebuild their understanding of who we were and how we came to be. One of the most famous of these silent testimonies is Lucy, a 3.2 million-year-old Australopithecus afarensis discovered in Ethiopia in 1974. Her skeleton was only about 40% complete, and yet she told researchers an extraordinary story. She walked upright on 2 legs long before the human brain had grown to its modern size. This overturned a foundational assumption. Scientists had believed that large brains came first, that intelligence led to walking. Lucy proved the opposite. Our ancestors stood up first, freeing their hands, and the brain followed, slowly over millions of years. There is something poetic in this. We often assume that what we can think comes before what we can do, but evolution suggests otherwise. Sometimes the body leads, and the mind catches up. The silent bones do not tell us everything, but what they do say, they say with a precision and honesty that no written record can match. They are the truest autobiography our species has ever left behind. Envision being a child again, walking barefoot on a muddy path after a summer rain. You look back and see the small, clear prints your feet have left behind. Something about seeing your own trace in the earth feels significant, as though you have briefly written your name in the world. Now travel back, in your imagination, 3.6 million years. A place called Laetoli in what is now Tanzania. A volcanic eruption has just dusted the landscape in fine ash, and across this fresh, soft surface, 3 individuals walk side by side. Their footprints are preserved there still. Discovered in 1978 by a team led by Mary Leakey, the Laetoli footprints are among the most breathtaking discoveries in human prehistory. They were made by Australopithecus afarensis, the same species as Lucy, walking upright with a heel-to-toe stride that is unmistakably human in character. What moves people most about these prints is not their scientific significance, though that is extraordinary. It is the intimacy of them. The tracks suggest that one of the individuals may have paused and stepped sideways, perhaps turning to look at something nearby. Another set of prints shows a slightly smaller individual walking in the footsteps of a larger one. They were not marching, they were living. 3.6 million years later, we can follow where they walked. We can measure the length of their stride. We can, if we are quiet and willing, feel something of what it meant to be alive on that ash-covered plain, uncertain of the future, moving forward anyway. The first footsteps were not a triumph. They were simply a beginning, and beginnings, as we all know from our own lives, are rarely as dramatic as they later seem. Most of the time, you are just walking, not knowing yet that every step matters. Picture yourself camping on a cold night. The fire beside you does more than warm your hands. It pushes back the dark. It changes the quality of the silence. Around that fire, somehow, the world feels smaller and safer, and the people nearby feel closer. Our relationship with fire is one of the oldest love stories in human history. The earliest confirmed evidence of controlled fire use by our ancestors dates back roughly 1 million years, found at a site called Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. But some researchers believe hominins were using fire even earlier, perhaps as far back as 1.5 million years ago. Here is what makes this extraordinary. Fire was not invented. It was borrowed. lightning strikes, volcanic eruptions, spontaneous combustion in dry grasslands. Fire existed long before any human hand reached toward it. The profound moment was not creating fire, it was choosing to keep it. Imagine the courage of that choice. Approaching something that every instinct in your body screams is dangerous, cupping an ember in your hands, carrying it carefully back to your group, feeding it, tending it, not letting it die. Fire changed everything. Cooked food meant better nutrition and smaller digestive systems, freeing energy for brain development. Warmth meant survival in colder climates. Light extended the usable hours of the day, and the hearth, that circle of warmth and glow, may have been the birthplace of language, storytelling, and social bonding. Some anthropologists call fire the first technology, but I think of it differently. Fire was the first relationship, a living, breathing, consuming thing that demanded care and gave back warmth and light in return. Every time you strike a match or flip a stove burner, you are continuing something ancient. A partnership your ancestors began 1 million years ago on a cold night, leaning toward a small, precious flame. Think about the last dream you had that stayed with you after waking. Perhaps it was strange, illogical, emotionally vivid in a way that ordinary moments rarely are. You may have lain still for a moment, trying to hold onto its edges before it dissolved into the morning. Now consider this: the brain structures responsible for dreaming, the regions associated with memory consolidation, emotional processing, and visual imagination, are among the most ancient parts of the human mind. They were not added recently. They are part of an inheritance so old it predates our species. Rapid eye movement sleep, the phase in which most vivid dreaming occurs, is found not just in humans, but in virtually all mammals and many birds. A sleeping rat displays the same brainwave signatures during REM sleep as a human. A dog runs in its sleep, chasing something only it can see. This means the architecture of dreaming was in place long before Homo sapiens existed. Our earliest ancestors, walking the African savannas, sleeping in trees or rock shelters, were dreaming. Of what? We cannot know. But the mechanism was there. Some researchers believe that dreaming served an evolutionary function, allowing the brain to rehearse dangerous scenarios, process emotional experiences, and consolidate learning during rest. In other words, dreams may have been one of the oldest tools of survival. There is something quietly extraordinary about this. In your most private, most irrational, most achingly personal mental experience, you are sharing something with every ancestor who has ever closed their eyes in exhaustion after a long day in an ancient world. Your dreams are not just yours. They are a biological tradition practiced every night for millions of years by creatures who could not name what was happening, but who woke each morning carrying the faint, fading residue of something that felt meaningful. Think of an old photograph, the kind with soft edges and faded colours, where a face looks back at you across time. You do not know this person. Their name is lost. Their voice, their laugh, everything that made them vivid and real in their own moment is gone. But the face remains, and somehow, looking at it, you feel a connection you cannot quite explain. Now imagine a face so old there is no photograph, no painting, no written description, only the shape of a skull. Forensic artists and paleoanthropologists have spent decades learning to reconstruct the faces of our ancient ancestors from bone alone. Using skull geometry, muscle attachment points, and comparative anatomy, they build three-dimensional portraits of individuals who lived tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago. The results are both startling and strangely moving. A Neanderthal woman, reconstructed from remains discovered in Iraq, looks back at you with eyes that are deeply human. A Homo heidelbergensis individual, reconstructed from a skull found in Germany and estimated to be 300,000 years old, could, with different clothing, pass unnoticed in a modern crowd. These lost faces remind us of something important. The distance between us and our ancient ancestors is not as vast as our imagination tends to make it. The emotions behind those reconstructed eyes, curiosity, wariness, recognition, are ones we know. What we have lost is not their humanity. We have lost their names, their songs, their specific experiences. But the face that carried all of that architecture of expression and individuality, is recognizable. It is, in the deepest sense, family. Every lost face recovered by science is a small act of remembrance. A way of saying, across impossible distances of time, you were here. You were real. And we have not entirely forgotten you. Lean into this image for a moment, a young mother, somewhere on the ancient African plains, sitting beside the still form of a child. She does not have words for what she feels. Language, as we know it, may not yet exist. But what moves through her body in that moment, the tightening in the throat, the burning behind the eyes, the collapse of breath, that is not different from grief as we know it today. The capacity for grief is one of the oldest things about us. Evidence of mourning behaviour in early humans stretches back hundreds of thousands of years. At a site called Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones, in northern Spain, researchers discovered the skeletal remains of at least 28 individuals of an ancient human species, carefully deposited in a deep chamber. They were not thrown there. They were placed deliberately with what appears to be intentional care. The oldest known deliberate burial dates to approximately 100,000 years ago in the Levant, where Homo sapiens were interred with food, tools and ornaments, objects that suggest a belief, or at least a hope, that something continues after death. But grief does not require burial to exist. Chimpanzees have been observed carrying the bodies of deceased infants for days, unable to let go. Elephants return to the bones of their dead, touching them gently with their trunks. The impulse to mourn is older than our species. What does this tell us? That tenderness is not a product of civilization. It is a root buried deep beneath everything we have built. Before we had cities, before we had agriculture, before we had writing or religion or philosophy, we had the oldest tears. And every tear you have ever cried for something you loved and lost, it comes from the same ancient place. Close your eyes and think of the person in your life who sacrificed most quietly, who worked without recognition, who made things possible that you only understood much later, if at all. Now multiply that across thousands of generations, until the name is gone, the face is gone, every record is gone, but the consequence remains. You. In the entire span of human prehistory, women have been catastrophically underrepresented in the fossil record, not because they were absent from history, but because the tools we used to find them were shaped by assumptions about who mattered. For much of the 20th century, the story of human evolution was told almost entirely through the lens of male activity. The hunter, the toolmaker, the explorer. Women were peripheral characters, waiting at the camp while history happened elsewhere. But the science tells a different story. Research into ancient foraging societies reveals that in many early human communities, gathered plant foods, an activity primarily carried out by women, provided the majority of daily caloric intake. Not the dramatic hunt, but the patient, skilled daily labour of knowing which plants were safe, where they grew, and how to prepare them. Mitochondrial DNA, which is inherited exclusively through the maternal line, has allowed geneticists to trace ancient population movements and relationships in ways that highlight female lineages. The concept of mitochondrial Eve, the most recent common matrilineal ancestor of all living humans, places a single woman in Africa approximately 150,000 years ago. She had a name. We simply do not know it. There is something important in sitting with that absence, in recognizing that the unnamed mothers of human history are not silent because they had nothing to say. They are silent because no one wrote it down. Their contribution was written in something more enduring. In us. Settle into this with me. You are standing in a cave, somewhere in what will one day be called France. The year is perhaps 50,000 years before the present. A small fire burns near the entrance. Around it, a group of people sit in silence. Earlier today, someone died. Someone known. Someone loved. There are no words yet for what they are feeling, but the feeling is there, unmistakably, in the way they sit close together, in the way no one gets up to leave. Ancient grief is not a metaphor, it is a documented reality. At the site of Shanidar Cave in Iraq, excavated beginning in the 1950s, archaeologists discovered the remains of a Neanderthal individual buried approximately 60,000 years ago. Initial analysis suggested the body had been surrounded by flowers, a claim that generated enormous controversy and debate that continues to this day. Whether or not flowers were deliberately placed, what is not disputed is that this individual, known as Shanidar I, survived to old age with severe physical disabilities. A withered arm. Healed fractures. Evidence of significant vision loss. This person could not have survived without care from others. That care is itself a form of grief, an answer to loss before it fully arrives. A refusal to abandon, an insistence that a life has value even when it cannot contribute to the hunt or the foraging. Grief and compassion are two faces of the same ancient feeling. You cannot grieve what you did not love. And love, in its quiet, daily, practical form, was present in human communities long before we had the philosophy to describe it. We did not learn to love from culture. Culture learned from us. Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding that every word, every symbol, every letter, in every language has simply vanished. Street signs are blank. Books are empty pages. Your phone screen shows only colours and shapes. You remember everything you know, but you cannot read, and no one can write. How long before you find another way to remember, another way to communicate across time? For the vast majority of human existence, there was no writing. The earliest known writing systems emerged only around 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia and Egypt, but humans have been behaviourally modern, thinking, planning, communicating in complex ways for at least 300,000 years. That gap, nearly 300,000 years of sophisticated human life before a single written word, is staggering, and it raises a profound question. How did people remember? The answer is that they used everything available. Oral tradition, with stories precise enough to encode navigational information, genealogies, and historical events across hundreds of generations. Ritual, which encodes information in the body through repeated ceremony. Art, the cave paintings of Lascaux and Chauvet and Altamira, which are not decoration but communication. Messages sent across tens of thousands of years. Recent research suggests that some Aboriginal Australian oral traditions may preserve accurate geographical and ecological information from more than 10,000 years ago, before the end of the last ice age. Stories about coastlines that no longer exist, about animals that have been extinct for millennia. Before writing, memory was not stored outside the body. It was stored inside it, in songs, in rituals, in the careful repetition of stories told to children who would tell them to their children. We did not become capable of transmitting knowledge when we invented writing. We became faster at it. The transmission was already there, patient and precise, carried forward on the breath of every storyteller who ever lived. Let yourself consider this for a moment. Think of a time when someone placed a hand on your shoulder without a word, and somehow that was exactly enough. No explanation needed, no language required, just the warmth and weight of contact, saying what neither of you could articulate. Touch is the oldest language. Before speech, before gesture, before any symbolic communication, there was the body meeting another body and the meaning that transferred in that contact. The neurological basis for social touch, the pathways through which physical contact triggers the release of oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone, is ancient. These systems are found in all social mammals. They predate primates. They predate, by an enormous margin, any distinctly human capacity. Grooming, the behavior of carefully attending to another's skin or hair, is one of the primary social bonding mechanisms in our closest primate relatives. Chimpanzee communities spend hours in mutual grooming, not because they are always dirty, but because the act of touching creates trust, reduces stress hormones, and reinforces social bonds. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar has proposed that human language evolved partly as a replacement for grooming, a way of maintaining social bonds across larger groups than physical touch could manage. In other words, the first words may have been a kind of vocal touching, a way of reaching people we could no longer reach with our hands, and yet touch never went away. We still instinctively reach for the hand of someone we love in difficult moments. We still settle into the held embrace of grief or joy. We still feel, in our nervous systems, the ancient calming signal of skin on skin. Every hug you have ever given carries 300 million years of evolutionary memory. It is the oldest thing two people can say to each other. And it still, somehow, says everything. Picture a vast library, floor-to-ceiling shelves, millions of volumes, a lifetime of knowledge accumulated over centuries. Now imagine that 98% of the lights are off. You can only read what the light directly touches. Everything else is there, waiting, unread. That is roughly our relationship to ancient human history. The archaeological record, everything we have physically recovered from our past, represents an almost incomprehensibly small fraction of what once existed. Organic materials, wood, fibre, leather, food, decompose and vanish. Most sites were never buried under conditions that preserve remains. Most of the world has never been systematically excavated. What this means is that our entire understanding of human prehistory is built on a whisper, on fragments so rare and scattered that every new discovery can, and frequently does, overturn what we believed we knew. Scientists call these unknown populations and undiscovered histories sleeping giants. Entire civilizations of the mind, entire traditions of knowledge, entire ways of being human, lying preserved in the earth, waiting. In 2013, the Rising Star Cave system in South Africa yielded the bones of a new species, Homo naledi, announced in 2015. These individuals had brains roughly the size of an orange, far smaller than modern humans, yet their hands showed tool-using capability, and their remains appeared to have been deliberately deposited in a deep cave chamber. We do not know yet what Homo naledi was capable of. We do not know when they lived, how they thought, what they felt. But they were there, waiting in the dark for us to find them. The sleeping giants of human prehistory are not dead ends. They are chapters we have not yet been able to read. And every time the lights come on in another corner of that vast library, the story of who we are becomes more complex, more astonishing, and more deeply worth knowing. Imagine yourself on a cold morning, before the heating comes on, and you pull another person close. Not out of romance necessarily, just warmth, just the simple animal need to share heat against the chill. There is something in that moment that feels older than words. You are right to sense that. It is. Thermoregulation, the ability of a group to share warmth, was a survival mechanism for early humans that went far beyond biology. The choice to sleep close together, to huddle in groups, to share a fire and its reflected warmth, was not merely practical. It was the foundation of community. Research into the sleeping arrangements of contemporary hunter-gatherer societies has revealed that communal sleep is nearly universal among foraging peoples. Individuals sleep close together, often in contact, in an arrangement that maximizes shared body heat and also, significantly, shared awareness. If a predator approaches in the night, one person's disturbance wakes others. The social warmth of early human groups went beyond temperature. Studies of ancient campsites, where hearths are found at the centers of sleeping arrangements, suggest that the fire was not just a heat source, it was a social anchor. The warmth it provided was physical, yes, but also psychological. Tribes gathered around it, knowledge was passed around it, the young were kept near it. Anthropologists have proposed that the quality of light from a campfire, its flickering, unpredictable illumination, specifically activates areas of the human brain associated with social thought and narrative imagination. The campfire, in other words, may have literally helped build the storytelling mind. We have traded that particular warmth for central heating and electric light. But notice how easily we still gather around a candle, how a fireplace draws people toward it at a party, how we cluster instinctively toward whatever warmth is nearest. The ancient habit is still in us, waiting patiently for the cold. Here is something worth sitting with. You share roughly 50% of your dinner with a banana, 60% with a fruit fly, 85% with a zebrafish, 98.7% with a chimpanzee. We spend a great deal of effort marking the boundaries between ourselves and everything else. But at the molecular level, those boundaries are remarkably thin. The hidden kinship between modern humans and our ancient relatives runs deeper than we typically acknowledge. For decades, Neanderthals were portrayed as brutish, dim, fundamentally different from us. The name itself became a cultural insult. But the evidence tells a different story. Neanderthals had brains as large as ours, sometimes larger. They buried their dead. They used pigments, possibly for body decoration or symbolic purposes. They made musical instruments from bone. They cared for their injured and elderly, and, as we have discussed, they interbred with our ancestors and contributed to the genetic heritage of living humans today. The Denisovans, known only from a handful of bone fragments and an enormous quantity of ancient DNA, appear to have adapted to high-altitude environments. Tibetan peoples today carry a Denisovan gene variant that allows them to survive at elevations that would cause dangerous hypoxia in most humans. A gift, carried across 40,000 years. What does it mean that we are not a pure singular lineage, but a community of overlapping, interbreeding populations, each contributing something to the whole? It means that the story of human origins is not one of competition and replacement. It is a story of connection, of lives intertwining across vast distances of geography and time, of something being passed forward in the most intimate way possible. Our hidden kinship is not just with the ancient humans we evolved from. It is with every living thing that breathes and dreams and reaches toward warmth. We are not alone in this. We were never meant to be. Step into this for a moment. You are walking through a forest, and your phone has no signal and your map is gone. What do you have left? You have your eyes, reading the light through the canopy, your nose sorting the information in the air, your ears passing distance and direction from every sound, your feet feeling the texture of the ground, telling you which way the slope runs. This is not helplessness. This is an ancient skill set, and it was once everything. Our early ancestors navigated the world through a richness of sensory perception that modern life rarely asks us to fully engage. Research into traditional hunter-gatherer communities has documented tracking abilities that seem almost impossible to contemporary urban observers. The ability to read animal trails days old, to identify individual animals by footprint, to navigate home across hundreds of miles of terrain using only the stars, wind direction, and subtle shifts in plant distribution. These are not supernatural abilities. They are the product of attentive, embodied living across a lifetime. A nervous system trained from childhood to read an environment the way we might read text. But here is what science has found remarkable. When modern humans, even those with no background in tracking or wilderness navigation, are placed in natural environments and given time to observe without distractions, many of these perceptual abilities re-emerge more quickly than expected. They were not lost. They were dormant. The sensory intelligence of our ancestors is not gone from us. It is submerged, waiting beneath the traffic noise and screen glow, patient as an old language you once spoke fluently. Ancient senses remind us that the human body is still, at its core, built for a world of immediate, physical, sensory richness. And every moment you step outside and let the world in through all of you, you are reaching back to touch something that has always been yours. Envision walking into a healer's space, not a modern clinic, but the oldest version of that idea. A small, sheltered area, the smell of specific plants burning, someone who knows things that others in the community rely on, someone whose knowledge means the difference between suffering and relief. This has been part of human life for a very long time. The earliest evidence of intentional plant use for medicinal purposes dates back to the Neanderthals. At the site of Shanidar Cave in Iraq, residue analysis of the sediment surrounding ancient remains detected traces of multiple medicinal plants, including yarrow, groundsel, and ephedra, a plant still used in modern medicine for its bronchodilator properties. More recently, studies of wild chimpanzee behavior have documented the deliberate self-medication of parasites using specific plant species. Chimps will swallow rough leaves whole, not chewing them, in a way that mechanically expels intestinal worms. They select these leaves specifically when ill. This behavior, called zoopharmacognosy, suggests that the relationship between living beings and plant medicine is far older than human beings, or even human-like intelligence. What our ancestors developed was the knowledge, accumulated and transmitted across generations, of which plants helped with which conditions. This was not magic or superstition in its origins. It was careful empirical observation of cause and effect, practiced across thousands of years. The first healers were not separate from their communities. They were their community's most careful observers, people who paid close attention to what happened when certain things were eaten, applied, or inhaled. People who remembered, and who taught others to remember. Modern pharmacology, with all its precision and power, is built on a foundation of herbal knowledge so old its origins are lost. When you take a willow bark-derived aspirin, you are not departing from ancient wisdom. You are, in a very real sense, still practicing it. Try this. Recall a memory from very early childhood. Not something you know from being told, but something you actually remember, however faintly. Perhaps a smell, or a texture, or the quality of light in a particular room. Now consider that this memory, faint as it is stored not just in your mind but in the patterns of synaptic connection across billions of neurons, and that those neurons, that architecture of remembering, was shaped by evolutionary pressures that go back millions of years. Memory is not simply a record-keeping function. It is a survival system. And it is ancient. Episodic memory, the ability to recall specific events from the past and mentally place yourself back inside them, is present in some form in many animals. Scrub jays can remember not just where they hid food, but what they hid, and when they hid it, adjusting their retrieval behavior based on how long ago they stored each cache. In humans, episodic memory is extraordinarily sophisticated. We do not just remember what happened. We re-experience it, we simulate it, we revise it each time we recall it, with new context, new emotion, new meaning. Scientists now believe that this capacity for mental time travel, for placing oneself in remembered pasts and imagined futures, may be one of the most distinctly developed human cognitive abilities, and its roots stretch far back. But here is the humbling part. Memories are not stable recordings. Every time you remember something, you are reconstructing it from fragments, influenced by mood, by context, by everything that has happened since. In a profound sense, you are creating the past as you remember it. Our ancestors' memories of their world were just as vivid, just as real, just as subject to revision as our own. The sleeping memories of our species, those we can no longer access, were not simple or primitive. They were someone's whole world.
Picture a city, a real vibrant city. Not enormous by modern standards, perhaps a few thousand people, but dense with life. Markets and children, argument and music, love and grief, and the daily negotiation of living closely with others. Languages spoken nowhere else on Earth. Knowledge of the local landscape accumulated over dozens of generations. Now, imagine it is simply gone. This is not unusual in human history. It is the default condition. Of the many thousands of distinct human cultures and languages that have existed since our species emerged, the vast majority are gone without leaving a trace that survives to the present day. Linguists estimate that around half of the world's 7,000 surviving languages will fall silent within the next century. Each one carries a unique cognitive framework for understanding reality, specific vocabulary for phenomena that have no equivalent in other languages, entire systems of ecological and cultural knowledge that exist nowhere else. But the vanished tribes of deep prehistory took something even more irretrievable. They took knowledge accumulated across thousands of generations of living in specific places, caring for specific landscapes, understanding specific animals and plants and seasonal patterns in ways that are now permanently inaccessible. The Tasmanians, isolated from mainland Australia for 10,000 years when rising seas flooded the land bridge, developed a unique cultural trajectory. When European contact decimated their population in the early 19th century, an entire arc of human experience, unlike any other on Earth, was ended in a few decades. What is the right response to this knowledge? Not guilt, which is paralytic. Not despair, which is self-indulgent. Perhaps simply attention, the recognition that every human community that still exists is irreplaceable, that diversity of culture is not a curiosity. It is a resource, a library, a gift. The vanished tribes are beyond recovery, but the ones still here are not. Lean into this one. Imagine hearing a sound that has not been heard in 40,000 years. Not music, exactly. It's more like something between music and speech, between singing and speaking. A sound that carries meaning in its rhythm and pitch, rather than in recognizable words. What might the voice of our earliest ancestors have sounded like? This is one of the most tantalizing questions in paleoanthropology, and also one of the most difficult to answer, because the voice itself leaves no fossil. Sound dissolves the moment it is made. But we have indirect evidence. The hyoid bone, a small U-shaped bone in the throat that anchors the muscles of speech and swallowing, has been found preserved in Neanderthal remains. The Neanderthal hyoid is anatomically nearly identical to our own, suggesting a vocal apparatus capable of similar sounds. Research into the ear canals of ancient skulls has revealed that Neanderthals could hear within a frequency range very similar to modern humans, including the specific frequencies most important for distinguishing the consonants and vowels of speech. They could hear what we hear. Some researchers believe that Neanderthals had language, or something very close to it. Not our language, perhaps not even a fully symbolic language, but a communicative system complex enough to coordinate hunting, share information, and perhaps, in some form, tell stories. The ancient voices are silent now. But their physical infrastructure remains in the bones of those who carried it, and in the inherited capacity for language that every human child demonstrates without being explicitly taught. Language is so natural to us, so effortless in its emergence in childhood, that we forget how extraordinary it is. The ancient voices shaped ours, and somewhere in the way you speak, in the rhythm and music of your daily speech, there is an echo too old to fully hear. Hold something in your hand. A smooth river stone, perhaps, or a piece of rough concrete. Feel its weight, its temperature, the texture of its surface. Objects carry information through time in a way that nothing else quite matches. The oldest human-made objects are stone tools, and they are staggering in their implications. The Oldowan tool tradition, the earliest known systematic stoneworking technology, dates back approximately 2.6 million years, predating the genus Homo entirely. These tools were made by Australopithecus, or a close relative, our pre-human ancestors, who recognized that striking one stone against another at the right angle could create a sharp edge capable of cutting through hide and accessing the nutritious marrow inside bones. For 2.6 million years, human and pre-human communities have been making stone tools. The sophistication evolved over that time dramatically. But the basic act, the intentional modification of stone to create a useful edge, is the longest-running continuous technology in the history of life on Earth. Think about that. 2.6 million years. Our own written history stretches back barely 5,000. The Industrial Revolution happened roughly 250 years ago. The entire span of agriculture, the revolution we credit with creating civilization, covers only about 12,000 years. Stone tools were being made for more than 200 times longer than any of that. What knowledge went into those tools? Not just the physical technique, which required understanding of stone fracture mechanics, force vectors, and material selection, but the knowledge of where to find the right stones, how to carry the best ones, how to teach the technique to the next generation. Stone memories are the most literal memories we have. Every flaked hand axe is an ancient mind, frozen mid-thought, waiting for someone to recognize the intention behind the edge. Step into this image. Somewhere on the edge of a great grassland, a small group of people are breaking camp. They do not own the land they leave behind. They carry everything they need. Evening, they will be somewhere new. For most of human history, this was life. The popular imagination of early human migration often pictures it as a dramatic, purposeful march, a determined spreading across continents, driven by ambition or competition. But the archaeological and genetic evidence suggests something far more gentle, more incremental, Most ancient human migration happened at the pace of a lifetime, or many lifetimes. A group might move their seasonal range slightly northward over a generation, following shifting resources. Their children might do the same. Over 10 generations, over 1,000 years, a people could find themselves in a radically different environment without anyone having ever consciously decided to migrate. Genetic studies of ancient populations reveal this pattern in extraordinary detail. The movement of Homo sapiens out of Africa, which began somewhere between 60 and 100,000 years ago, was not a single wave. It was a complex series of expansions, contractions, replacements, and remixings, more like the slow spreading of water across an uneven surface than a march, and these early wanderers were not erasing the landscape. They were, in many ways, shaped by it. Different environments selected for different physical and cognitive traits. Populations adapted to their specific corners of the world, developing unique relationships with local plants and animals, unique technologies for unique challenges. The gentle wanderers did not conquer the earth. They became part of it in thousands of different ways across hundreds of thousands of years, and their wandering spirit, that readiness to move, to adapt, to find home in new places, is still with us. Perhaps it is part of why the idea of being somewhere new, of the open road, of possibility beyond the horizon, still pulls at something deep inside. Imagine a library that no one can enter anymore. The doors are sealed. The books are in languages with no translation key. But you can walk around the outside and occasionally press your ear to the wall and hear, very faintly, something that sounds like words. That is our relationship to the languages of deep prehistory. Modern linguistics can reconstruct ancient languages with remarkable precision, up to a point. The method of comparative reconstruction, examining shared words and grammatical structures across related languages, has allowed researchers to reconstruct Proto-Indo-European, the ancestral language of most European and South Asian languages, as it may have been spoken roughly 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. But 5,000 to 6,000 years is recent, in evolutionary terms. Human language, most researchers believe, is at least 100,000 years old, and possibly 300,000 years old or more. The gulf between what we can reconstruct and the full depth of linguistic history is almost immeasurable. What we do have are traces. Certain deep structural features shared across apparently unrelated language families, which may suggest very ancient common origins. Certain sound changes that appear to follow universal patterns regardless of geography. The fundamental cognitive architecture of language, built into every human brain regardless of culture, suggesting a single ancient origin. Some researchers have proposed a proto-language called proto-human, or proto-world, a hypothetical ancestor of all human languages. The idea remains deeply controversial, but the search for it illuminates something remarkable. Every living human language, however different from every other, is a descendant. They are all cousins, however distantly removed. The buried languages are gone. But the capacity that produced them is still here in the mouths of 8 billion people, speaking thousands of living tongues that are, at the deepest structural level, variations on a single ancient theme.
Run your fingers across the back of your own hand for a moment. Feel the tendons shifting beneath the skin, the small bones moving in perfect coordination. Something as ordinary as picking up a cup of coffee involves a mechanical precision so intricate that engineers have spent decades trying to replicate it in robotics, with only partial success. Now consider that this hand, your hand, is essentially the same hand that pressed itself against a cave wall in El Castillo, Spain, roughly 37,000 years ago, and blew red ochre around its outline, leaving a silhouette that still exists today. The oldest known hand stencils in the world are found in cave sites across Europe and Indonesia, with some estimates now pushing their age to over 40,000 years. They were made by pressing a hand flat against a rock surface and blowing pigment around it, the same technique a child might use today with paint and paper. Why did they do it? The honest answer is that we do not fully know. But there is something irresistible about the most obvious interpretation. I was here. This is my hand. Remember me. The anatomy of those ancient hands is indistinguishable from ours. The proportions, the thumb's opposable angle, the spread of the fingers, it is the same architecture. The hand that flaked a stone tool 2.5 million years ago was already becoming the hand we carry today. What that means is quietly profound. Every act of making, every craft, every surgery, every painting, every page turned, every hand held in grief or love or greeting, flows from the same ancient design. The oldest hands are not relics of something lost. They are the beginning of everything we have ever made, and they are, unmistakably, ours. Cast your mind back to the last time you felt genuinely hungry. Not inconveniently hungry, but truly, urgently hungry, the kind that sharpens your focus and makes the smell of food almost unbearable. Now hold that feeling and imagine that every single day of your life begins with that feeling and ends only when you have found and prepared enough food to quiet it. For most of human existence, finding food was not a trip to the market or the opening of a refrigerator. It was the central organising project of every day, and yet for most of that time it appears to have worked remarkably well. The transition to farming, which began roughly 12,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent and independently in several other regions of the world, is often framed as a great leap forward. But the skeletal evidence tells a more complicated story. Early farmers were, on average, shorter than their hunter-gatherer predecessors. They showed more signs of nutritional deficiency, more dental cavities from starchy diets, more infectious disease, the result of living in closer proximity to both animals and other people. Hunter-gatherers, by contrast, ate an extraordinarily diverse diet. Estimates suggest that foraging peoples typically consumed between 100 and 200 different plant and animal species across a year. Modern agricultural populations often rely on fewer than 20. Why then did farming spread? Because it could support larger populations in smaller areas, quantity over diversity, volume over variety. And population size, it turns out, is a powerful force in shaping history. But before farming, something else was true. People lived lightly on the land. They moved with the seasons. And the earth, for a long time, was generous enough to meet them where they were. Picture a family dinner. Not the ideal version, but the real one. Someone is talking too much. Someone is quietly sulking. There are old tensions and old jokes and the particular comfort of people who know each other so completely that pretending is not an option. Now carry that familiar, complicated, deeply human scene back 100,000 years. The details change. The setting is a rock shelter or a camp by a river. The food is roasted tubers and whatever protein the day provided. The language is different, or perhaps not yet language as we know it. But the dynamics, the hierarchy, the affection, the irritation, the care of the elderly for the young and the young for the elderly, these are recognizable. Anthropologists studying the social organization of ancient hunter-gatherer groups have found that the nuclear family as a unit is not the universal baseline of human social life. Ancient and contemporary foraging groups tend to organize around a more fluid, extended network in which multiple families share resources, child-rearing, and decision-making. This is sometimes called cooperative breeding, and it appears to be one of the most distinctly human evolutionary traits. Human children require more years of dependent care than the young of any other species. A human mother cannot, alone, provide everything a growing child needs. She never could. The village, in this sense, is not a metaphor. It is a biological necessity. Research into cooperative breeding suggests that grandmothers, specifically, played a crucial role in early human-child survival. The post-reproductive lifespan unique to human females, what researchers call the grandmother hypothesis, may have evolved precisely because grandmothers who survived to care for grandchildren increased those children's survival rates significantly. Ancient families were not simpler than ours. They were differently complex, and at their centre, as at the centre of every family across time, was the irreducible human need to be known and to know someone else. Suppose you woke one morning and every familiar ritual of your day had been stripped away. No coffee routine, no morning scroll, no particular way you fold the newspaper or lace your shoes. Just a blank, formless morning with no structure of habit to move through. How quickly would you invent new ones? Ritual is not a product of organised religion. It is a product of the human nervous system. The repetition of meaningful action, the marking of transitions, the creation of reliable patterns in an uncertain world, these are needs so deep they appear to be wired into us. The earliest evidence of what we might call ritual behaviour in our ancestors dates back to at least 300,000 years ago. At the site of Cima de los Huesos in Spain, the bodies of at least 28 individuals were deliberately placed in an inaccessible cave chamber. This required effort, intention, and researchers believe some form of shared understanding about what death meant and how it should be marked. Ochre, a red iron-rich pigment, has been found at human sites dating back over 200,000 years, often in concentrations that suggest deliberate collection and use. Red ochre appears in burials, in cave art, and on ancient objects across multiple continents. Its consistent association with human remains and symbolic contexts suggests a role in ritual practice across an enormous span of time. Why red? Researchers speculate that the colour of blood, of fire, of the setting sun carried symbolic weight that required no explanation. It was viscerally meaningful in a way that crossed every cultural boundary. The unseen rituals of our ancient ancestors are lost to us in their specifics. But the impulse behind them, the need to mark what matters, to create meaning through deliberate action, is still performing itself in your life, every single day. Walk through any old cemetery and notice how much information is packed into even the simplest grave. A name, a date, perhaps a symbol, a cross, a star, a carved flower. Even in the most minimal burial, the living are making a statement to the future. This person existed. This person was loved. This person deserves to be remembered. That impulse, it turns out, is ancient beyond what most of us imagine. One of the earliest known deliberate burials occurred approximately 100,000 years ago at a site called Kafse Cave in Israel, where the remains of modern Homo sapiens were found interred with apparent intentionality, some accompanied by animal bones and shells. At another site, Skul Cave, a burial was found with a boar's jaw placed in the arms of the deceased. A boar's jaw, what does that mean? We cannot know with certainty, but the choice to include an object, a specific object, suggests a narrative, a memory, a relationship between the living and the dead that extended beyond the moment of loss. Neanderthal burials dated to between 60 and 100,000 years ago, have been found at multiple sites across Europe and the Middle East. The Teshik Tash burial in Uzbekistan contained the remains of a Neanderthal child surrounded by the horns of ibex, arranged in a pattern. What these hidden graves offer us is something more than archaeological data. They offer us a glimpse into the inner lives of people we might otherwise reduce to mere biology. Someone grieved these individuals. Someone felt that the earth itself should receive them carefully. The hidden graves remind us that the need to honour the dead is not a cultural invention. It is a human constant, stretching back through time to the very edge of what we recognise as our own kind. Let yourself sit with this for a moment. Not a dramatic, crushing famine, just the slow, quiet gnawing of not quite having enough. The way it changes your mood, your focus, the quality of your thoughts, the way everything, every conversation, every decision gets filtered through that single insistent need. Now imagine living in a world where that feeling was never entirely absent, where the line between enough and not enough was crossed regularly, seasonally, daily. For our ancient ancestors, hunger was not an exceptional emergency. It was a structural feature of existence. The human body carries the evidence of this in its design. We store fat with remarkable efficiency, far more readily than we burn it. We are powerfully drawn to calorie-dense foods, to sweetness, to fat, to salt. We experience the finding of food as a form of pleasure that rivals almost any other. These traits were not accidents. They were adaptations to a world in which calories were never guaranteed. But here is the unexpected revelation. Isotope analysis of ancient bones, which reveals the dietary composition of an individual over their lifetime, shows that early Homo sapiens were remarkably flexible eaters. Unlike most large mammals, which are specialists, humans appear to have been dietary generalists of extraordinary range. Coastal populations ate heavily from the sea. Inland populations ate more game and gathered more plant foods. Arctic populations survived almost entirely on animal fat and protein. This flexibility was and remains one of our greatest evolutionary assets. The same basic biology that drove ancient hunger also gave us the adaptability to eat almost anything the planet could offer. What ancient hunger built into us was not just the capacity to store energy. It built drive, creativity, the restless search for solutions. The very engine of human ingenuity may have been powered, at its deepest level, by the ancient motivating pressure of not quite having enough. Picture the quietest place you have ever been. Perhaps a mountain trail, or an empty beach at dawn, or a field far enough from town that you could hear actual silence. Remember the quality of that quiet, the way it changed your thinking, the way your nervous system shifted into a different register. Before cities, that was simply the world. The first true cities emerged roughly 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, in the region now occupied by Iraq. Uruk, one of the earliest, may have housed as many as 80,000 people at its peak. It was unprecedented. It was also, in the timescale of human existence, astonishingly recent. For the 300,000 or more years before cities, human beings lived in groups that rarely exceeded 150 individuals. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar proposed this figure, now called Dunbar's number, based on the observed correlation between primate brain size and social group size. The human neocortex, he argued, can comfortably maintain meaningful social relationships with roughly 150 people. In a group of 150, everyone knows everyone. Reputation, reciprocity, and direct accountability govern behaviour. There is no anonymity. There is no crowd to disappear into. Cities changed this profoundly. Suddenly, humans were living among thousands of strangers. New systems of trust, law, currency, and record-keeping had to be invented to manage relationships between people who did not and could not personally know each other. In a very real sense, Every institution of modern civilization, every law, every market, every social contract exists to solve the problem that cities created, the problem of how to live peaceably alongside strangers. Before cities, that problem did not exist. And the quiet that preceded them, that deep, uninterrupted quiet of small groups moving through a vast and unbuilt world, is something we carry a longing for even now, in ways we do not always recognize. Drift with me into this image. An early morning, the light just beginning to come through the trees. A woman moves quietly through the undergrowth, her eyes reading the ground and the canopy simultaneously. She knows this landscape intimately, the way you know the layout of your own home in the dark. She knows which plants are ready, which are not yet, which have already been visited by animals. She is not searching, she is reading. Gathering, the collection of plant foods, insects, shellfish and small animals, is often the invisible half of the hunter-gatherer equation. Hunting gets the narrative drama. Gathering gets the footnote. But research into the actual caloric contribution of gathered versus hunted food in contemporary and historically documented foraging societies tells a different story. In most environments, gathered plant foods provide the majority of calories. Hunting is crucial, especially in winter or in environments where plants are scarce, but it is also unreliable. The hunt fails more often than it succeeds. The gathered foods are there every day. This means that the quiet gatherers, most often women but also children and elderly individuals, were the dietary backbone of their communities for most of human history. Their knowledge, accumulated and transmitted across generations, was not secondary knowledge. It was foundational. Studies of foraging peoples in the Kalahari and Amazon have documented plant knowledge systems of staggering complexity. Hundreds of species identified by subtle visual cues across their entire growth cycle. Preparation methods that neutralize toxins. Seasonal calendars held entirely in memory. There is a particular kind of intelligence required for gathering. Patient, holistic, context-sensitive, deeply attentive to relationship and change over time. It is not the dramatic intelligence of the hunt. But without it, the hunt would mean very little. The quiet gatherers kept the world going. They always have. Think about the last time you laughed so genuinely that you temporarily forgot whatever was weighing on you. That physical release, the breath leaving the body in quick pulses, the face rearranging itself into something unguarded and open. Laughter is so automatic, so universal, that we rarely pause to consider how strange and wonderful it is. Here is what the research reveals. Laughter, as a vocalized behavior, predates language. It predates our species. Chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and orangutans all produce a vocalization during play that is structurally and acoustically similar to human laughter. It occurs in the same social contexts: rough and tumble play, tickling, social bonding. And the neural systems that produce it are ancient, rooted in the same brainstem circuits that regulate breathing and basic emotional expression in all mammals. Human laughter is unique in some ways. Our exhalation-only pattern differs from the panting laughter of other apes, but the roots of the behavior go back millions of years before Homo sapiens existed. What does this tell us? That play, and the laughter that accompanies it, are not luxuries added on top of survival behavior. They are survival behavior, of a particular kind. Play in young mammals builds motor skills, tests social boundaries, establishes relationships, and rehearses adult behaviors in a low-stakes context. Laughter is the signal that the context is safe, that this is pretend, that no one is actually going to get hurt. In ancient human groups, laughter may have served as a critical social lubricant, a way of diffusing tension, signaling trust, and maintaining the bonds that kept a community cooperative under pressure. The older laughter echoing through millions of years was not just about joy, though it was surely that too. It was the sound of connection, of safety, of the simple and profound relief of being among those who know you. And you know exactly what that sounds like. Imagine you are handed a beautiful, intricate piece of music. It has melody and rhythm and structure. It is clearly the work of a sophisticated musical mind. But every notation, every instruction, every annotation is in a system of symbols you have never seen before. You can hear the shape of what it might be, but you cannot read it. That is the position we are in with the languages of deep human prehistory. There are currently approximately 7,000 living languages on Earth. Linguists have reconstructed several ancient language families, working backward through time using the comparative method, identifying shared vocabulary and grammatical structures that hint at common ancestors. Proto-Indo-European, the ancestral language of most European and South Asian languages, has been partially reconstructed as spoken perhaps 6,000 years ago. But most of the languages ever spoken by human beings are sleeping now, beyond recovery. When the last speaker of a language dies without transmission, something happens that has no biological equivalent. An entire cognitive universe, a way of organizing perception and meaning and relationship that existed nowhere else, simply ends. Researchers studying endangered languages have documented remarkable phenomena. Some languages have grammatical structures that encode ecological relationships. Some have spatial orientation systems based on cardinal directions rather than relative position, creating a permanently activated internal compass in their speakers. Some have time concepts that flow in directions opposite to those of Indo-European languages. These are not just communication differences, they are different ways of experiencing reality. The sleeping languages of prehistory held thousands of years of accumulated wisdom, specific to specific places, specific relationships, specific ways of being human. We will never know exactly what was in them, but we know they were there. And the silence they left behind is a reminder that what we cannot hear can still have mattered enormously to those who spoke it. Carry yourself into this picture. It is night. The temperature is dropping quickly, the way it does on open grassland when the sun disappears. You have no walls, no roof. The wind is picking up. Around you, the sounds of the night are beginning, and some of them are large. Where do you go? The first shelter was not built. It was found, a cliff overhang, a cave mouth, the dense canopy of a large tree, a natural depression in the ground that cut the wind. Our earliest ancestors did not construct their safety, they read the landscape for it. The oldest known deliberately constructed shelters date back approximately 400,000 years, found at a site called Terra Amata in what is now Nice, France. These were simple, oval structures of branches and stones, temporary camps built and abandoned seasonally. But there is evidence of sheltering behaviour far older still. Broken stones and bone fragments found in ancient cave deposits suggest that hominins were using cave sites as home bases at least 1 million years ago, possibly much earlier. The shift from finding shelter to building it was a cognitive revolution as much as a practical one. To construct a shelter, you must be able to visualize a structure that does not yet exist. You must plan for a future need, gather materials in advance, and coordinate with others to assemble something beyond what any single individual could manage alone. Architecture, in other words, required imagination before it required tools. Every house you have ever lived in, every room that has ever felt like home, carries a lineage that stretches back to a cold night 400,000 years ago, when someone looked at branches and stones and saw walls and a roof in them. The first shelters were not impressive structures, but they were the beginning of the idea that the world could be shaped to meet human needs, and that idea changed everything. Let yourself settle into the memory of a meal that was truly memorable, not just delicious food, but the right food at the right time, shared with the right people. Perhaps after a long journey, or a difficult season, or at a celebration where the table itself felt like a gift. Now consider that feasting, the deliberate preparation and communal sharing of food beyond daily subsistence, appears to be among the oldest social behaviours in our species. At a site called Hilazon Taktik Cave in Israel, archaeologists discovered evidence of a feast held approximately 12,000 years ago, associated with the burial of a shaman. The remains of at least 3 wild cattle, 86 tortoise shells, and various other animals were found alongside the burial, in quantities and arrangements that suggest deliberate large-scale food preparation for a gathered group. But evidence of communal feasting stretches back further still. Sites across the ancient world show evidence of mass animal processing, bone accumulations that go far beyond what a small group would need for daily sustenance. Cooperative hunting followed by communal consumption appears to have been practiced for hundreds of thousands of years. Why does this matter? Because feasting is never purely about food. It is about alliance, about gratitude, about marking time, about creating the bonds of shared experience that hold communities together through difficult periods. A feast says, "We have more than we need today, and we choose to share it." That sentence, acted out in the distribution of food, is one of the oldest political gestures in human history. It builds trust. It creates obligation. It says, "When you have more than you need, I will expect the same." The forgotten feasts of our ancestors were the original social contract, written not in words, but in the communal act of eating together, at a fire that everyone helped to build. Close your eyes and place yourself beside a river. A real river, not a canal or a managed waterway. A river with its own will, its own speed, its own sound. Feel the pull of it, the constant movement, the way it insists on going somewhere. Water is the oldest relationship our species has. It may be the oldest relationship life itself has. The human body is approximately 60% water. Every major metabolic process requires it. The brain is particularly sensitive to even small deficits, with cognition, mood, and reaction time all degrading measurably before thirst becomes uncomfortable. We are, in the most literal sense, maintained by water from moment to moment. Our ancestors knew this with an intimacy we have largely lost. The location of water sources, their seasonal reliability, their quality and depth. This knowledge was not background information. It was the organizing principle of territorial range, migration patterns, and camp placement across the entire span of human prehistory. When researchers trace the movements of ancient human populations using genetic and archaeological data, they consistently find that those movements follow water. Coastal routes, river valleys, lake shores. The great corridors of human migration across Africa, out of Africa, across Asia and into the Americas, all of them trace the availability of fresh water as surely as a map traces roads. The relationship between early humans and water was also ceremonial. Many of the oldest ritual sites on Earth are located near springs, rivers, or coastlines. Water, with its qualities of reflection, of movement, of boundary between worlds, appears to have carried spiritual significance across dozens of cultures with no direct contact with each other. Ancient waters shaped where we went, how we lived, and perhaps how we thought about the boundary between the known and the unknown. And every time you pause, without quite knowing why, beside a river or a shore, you are feeling a recognition older than memory. Try to imagine owning the wind, not just the sensation of it, the actual wind. The movement of air across a particular landscape belonging to you, defined by lines you have drawn, enforced by agreements others have made with you. The absurdity is immediate and obvious. For most of human history, the idea of owning land would have seemed equally absurd. The concept of territorial borders as fixed, legally defined and violently enforced lines on the earth is extraordinarily recent. Nation-states, with their passports and checkpoints and treaties, are a phenomenon of the last few centuries. Even the older concept of land ownership, of soil as property only fully emerged with the agricultural revolution 12,000 years ago. Before that, for the vast majority of human existence, the relationship between people and land was one of use, not ownership. Foraging groups maintained territories in the sense of ranging areas, regions they returned to seasonally and knew intimately. Conflicts over resources certainly occurred, but the idea that a line drawn on the earth could confer exclusive, permanent rights would have required an entirely different conceptual framework. Research into contemporary foraging peoples before significant contact with agricultural or industrial societies consistently shows that land use was flexible, negotiated, and often shared, particularly in times of scarcity. Groups moved toward resources and away from danger without the need to cross a checkpoint or present documentation. What replaced that fluidity was not merely law. It was a transformation in the fundamental relationship between human beings and place. Land became property, territory became identity, and the line on the ground became something worth dying for. Before borders, the earth did not belong to anyone. Everyone belonged to the earth. That is not a romantic fantasy. For most of human history, it was simply the structure of reality. Think about what night actually is when you remove everything we have added to it. No streetlights, no screens, no refrigerator hum or distant traffic. Just the actual dark, the actual stars, the actual sounds of the living world continuing around you without illumination. For almost all of human history, that was night. Our relationship to darkness has changed more dramatically in the last 200 years than in the preceding 300,000. The invention of reliable artificial light, first gas lamps, then electric light, fundamentally restructured the human relationship to the daily cycle of light and dark. Before artificial light, the night was not a problem to be solved, it was a reality to be lived within. Research into pre-industrial sleep patterns suggests that humans did not sleep in a single consolidated block as we typically aim to now. Historical records and studies of contemporary communities without electric light reveal a pattern of segmented sleep, a first sleep of several hours, followed by a wakeful period of 1 to 2 hours in the middle of the night, followed by a second sleep until dawn. This wakeful period, sometimes called the watch or the dorveil in French, appears to have been used for quiet reflection, conversation, prayer, lovemaking, and tending to children. Some historians argue it may have been a uniquely contemplative time, the middle of the night holding a different quality of thought than either day or evening. Ancient nights were also richer in certain experiences we have largely lost. Darkness creates intimacy. It reduces the visual field, and with it the social performance that visibility demands. It shifts perception toward sound and smell and touch. The older nights our ancestors lived through were not empty time between useful days. They were a full, inhabited dimension of human experience. And something in us still knows this, in those rare moments when the lights go out and the real dark returns. Walk yourself into this scenario. Someone you love is sick. Not critically, not dying, but genuinely unwell and suffering. You have nothing. No pharmacy, no clinic, no internet to search. Just the landscape around you and everything you know about it. What do you reach for? This was the situation of every human being for 300,000 years. And they were not helpless. The earliest confirmed use of medicinal plants by hominins dates back approximately 60,000 years, with Neanderthal evidence from Shanidar Cave in Iraq. But the practice is almost certainly older. As we discussed earlier, our closest primate relatives self-medicate deliberately, suggesting the behaviour is rooted in something ancient and instinctual. What distinguishes human medicine from animal self-medication is the accumulation and transmission of knowledge. When a chimpanzee ingests rough leaves to expel parasites, it is responding to bodily signals in the moment. When an ancient healer prepares a specific plant compound for a specific condition, They are drawing on knowledge that may be hundreds of generations old, refined through observation and careful attention to outcome. Ethnobotanical research, the study of how contemporary traditional communities use plants medicinally, has repeatedly validated ancient practices through modern pharmacological analysis. Willow bark, used by cultures across multiple continents for pain and fever, contains salicylic acid, the active component of aspirin. Artemisia plants, used in traditional Chinese medicine for fever, yielded artemisinin, now the primary treatment for malaria. The first medicines were not guesses. They were the product of humanity's oldest science, the careful, patient observation of the natural world and the recording of what worked. Every time modern research validates an ancient remedy, it is not a coincidence. It is the confirmation that someone, long before written records, was paying very close attention. Place yourself in a landscape without a calendar. No months, no named days, no digital reminder telling you that winter is coming or that the rains are due. Just the sky, the animals, the plants, and the patterns you have spent a lifetime learning to read. Could you know, without a single external tool, that it is time to move, time to plant, time to preserve, time to prepare? Our ancestors could, and the knowledge they carried was not a simple thing. Before written calendars, human communities maintained intricate ecological calendars, timing their movements and activities to the cycles of specific plants, animals, stars, and weather patterns. The flowering of a particular plant signaled that certain fish would be running. The arrival of a specific bird indicated that certain berries were ripening. The position of stars at dusk told you how many weeks remained before the first frost. This kind of knowledge is called traditional ecological knowledge, and researchers studying it in contemporary indigenous communities have found it to be scientifically precise in ways that continue to astonish. Aboriginal Australian communities maintain astronomical knowledge encoded in oral tradition that correctly describes star positions and celestial events. Some Pacific Islander navigation traditions use wave patterns, bird behaviour and star positions to navigate open ocean with accuracy that rivals modern instruments. These are not simplified versions of scientific knowledge. They are complete systems of environmental understanding arrived at through thousands of years of meticulous observation, held in memory and transmitted through story, song and practice. The forgotten seasons of our ancestors were not chaos interrupted by occasional useful observations. They were a fully structured relationship with time, one that did not impose order onto nature, but read the order that was already there. Every season still turns as it always has. The patterns are still there. We have simply stopped reading them. Picture yourself setting out on a journey with no map, no destination, and no clear reason except that something, some combination of resource pressure, curiosity, and the persistent human pull toward the horizon, is moving you forward. This, in essence, describes almost every migration our species has ever made. The movement of Homo sapiens out of Africa, which began somewhere between 60,000 and 100,000 years ago, is often described in retrospect as a purposeful expansion. But the people doing the moving did not know they were making history. They were making decisions, small, local, practical decisions about where food was more plentiful, where the water was better, where the competing group to the east was not. These hidden journeys were not singular events. They were processes spreading across thousands of years, driven by individual and group choices so incremental that no single participant could have perceived the larger movement they were part of. The genetic evidence of these movements is now remarkably detailed. Researchers can trace specific DNA lineages across continents, identifying the paths taken, the bottlenecks where populations shrank to small founding groups, and the places where different populations merged and separated again. One of the most astonishing revelations of this genetic cartography is how recently some of the most distant journeys were completed. The ancestors of the first peoples of the Americas crossed into the continent approximately 15 to 20,000 years ago. and their descendants reached the southern tip of South America, the most remote corner of the inhabitable world, within a few thousand years. From Africa to the tip of South America, carried entirely by human feet and the occasional watercraft, that journey was completed in a blink of geological time. The hidden journeys of our ancestors were not driven by a plan. They were driven by the same thing that drives every human journey: the belief, however uncertain, that something worth finding lies ahead. Let yourself settle into a soft, quiet memory. A voice, maybe, singing something low and repetitive. The specific words barely matter. It is the sound, the rhythm, the warmth behind it that does the work. That reaches into the nervous system and says, without any words at all, you are safe. You can let go. This experience is so universal that researchers believe lullabies may predate language itself. The musicologist Sandra Trahub has studied infant responses to music across dozens of cultures and found that babies respond to lullabies in consistent ways regardless of the cultural origin of the music. A lullaby sung by a stranger from a different culture will calm an infant almost as effectively as one sung by a familiar caregiver, if it has the specific acoustic qualities of lullabies universally: a slow tempo, a descending melodic contour, a consistent and gentle rhythm. These features, found in lullabies from every human culture studied, appear to be responses to the biological parameters of an infant's nervous system, which settles in response to slow, predictable, warm sound. This means the lullaby is not a cultural invention. It is a biological conversation between a caregiver and an infant, a conversation that has been happening in some form since before Homo sapiens existed. Mothers of other primate species also use specific vocalizations with infants that share some features with lullabies. What did the lullabies of our ancient ancestors sound like? Not like ours, almost certainly, but they were there, some version of a low, rhythmic, gentle voice in the dark of a rock shelter or a temporary camp, telling an infant that the night was safe. That voice connects every human being who has ever been soothed to sleep to every human being who ever did the soothing. It is perhaps the oldest thread in the whole long story of who we are. There is a particular quality of movement that only long travel brings. Not the urgency of emergency, not the excitement of adventure, but the settled, rhythmic, almost meditative state of a body that has been walking for days. The world narrows to the next step, the next water source, the next place to sleep. Most of the great human migrations of prehistory happened like this, quietly, without drama. We tend to imagine ancient migrations as dramatic odysseys, bands of determined humans pushing through hostile wilderness toward a promised land. But the genetic and archaeological evidence suggests something considerably more mundane and considerably more interesting. Migration, for most of human prehistory, was less a journey than a lifestyle. Many ancient populations appear to have been in near constant slow movement, following resources across seasonal ranges that might span hundreds of miles. The difference between a seasonal migration and a permanent relocation was often simply that the group never quite returned to where they started. Studies of ancient Dinah have revealed that some of the most distant human population movements happened extremely slowly by modern standards, with groups moving perhaps 10 to 20 miles per generation. At that rate, crossing a continent would take thousands of years. It would not feel like migration at all. It would feel like living. The quiet migrations left their traces in genetics, in the distribution of tool technologies, in the spread of specific plant management practices and hunting techniques. Each trace is evidence of people moving, carrying their knowledge with them, depositing it in new places, mixing it with what was already there. What strikes me most is the patience in all of this. Not the impatience of exploration, but the deep biological patience of a species adapting to a world it is moving through slowly enough to actually understand. The quiet migrations shaped the entire human world, and they happened one unhurried step at a time. There is a particular feeling that comes over you when you see an old photograph of a relative you never met. A grandparent, perhaps, or someone further back. A great aunt, a distant cousin from a generation before your own. You study the face carefully. The eyes look familiar. The way they are holding their shoulders reminds you of something. And yet, this person is, in every practical sense, a complete stranger to you. You never shared a meal. You never heard their voice. You do not know what made them laugh or what kept them awake at night. Now extend that feeling back, not decades, but hundreds of thousands of years. In museums around the world, reconstructed faces of our ancient ancestors look out at visitors from behind glass displays. A Neanderthal woman with reddish hair and pale eyes. A Homo heidelbergensis individual with a broad, strong face and a gaze that seems, somehow, to carry the weight of a world we cannot fully imagine. And almost everyone who encounters these reconstructions experiences the same thing. A flicker of recognition, something that says, I know you. I do not know how, but I know you. This feeling is not imagination. It is biology responding to biology. The anatomical features that we read as expressions of inner life, the configuration of muscles around the eyes that signals emotion, the particular set of the jaw that suggests determination or grief or exhaustion, these features are ancient. They predate our species. The facial musculature of Neanderthals was capable of a range of expressions remarkably similar to our own, because the underlying architecture of emotional expression is something we share. Research published in the journal Science Advances in 2021 revealed that Neanderthals possessed a gene called FOXP2, associated in modern humans with language and fine motor control of the face and throat. This does not prove they spoke as we do, but it suggests their faces were capable of the kind of precise, rapid muscular movement that expression and speech require. And then there is the matter of the eyes. White sclerae, the visible whites of the eyes surrounding the iris, are unique to modern humans among all living primates. In other apes, the sclera is dark, which makes the direction of gaze much harder to read. In humans, the white sclera means that others can follow your gaze effortlessly. It is a feature that evolved for communication, for the sharing of attention, for the wordless language of look over there. Neanderthal skulls suggest they may have had partially visible sclerae as well, not as prominent as ours perhaps, but present enough to allow some degree of shared gaze. Think about what that means when an ancient human and a Neanderthal encountered each other at the edge of a forest and looked into each other's eyes. They were not looking into absolute alien unknowing. There was legibility there, a reading of intention, of emotion, of the basic social signals that both groups relied on for survival. They were familiar strangers to each other, just as they are to us now. And perhaps that familiarity was enough, at least sometimes, to choose connection over conflict. The genetic evidence says it was. We carry them inside us. They looked at us and saw something worth reaching toward. We looked back and did the same. The familiar strangers in the museum display are not exhibits. They are relatives. Distant, strange, impossible to fully know. But family nonetheless. And if you sit with that long enough, really sit with it, the glass between you feels thinner than it did before. Turn your hand over. Now make a fist, then open it slowly. Notice the precision in that movement, the way each finger responds to your intention with a speed and accuracy so reliable that you never think about it. You have been opening and closing that hand your entire life, and it has almost never failed you. Now consider that this hand, this precise and capable hand, did not appear fully formed. It was shaped over millions of years in dialogue with the objects it learned to hold. The oldest known stone tools were discovered at a site called Lomekwi 3 in Kenya, and they date to approximately 3.3 million years ago. Let that number settle for a moment. 3.3 million years. At that time, our genus Homo did not yet exist. The tools were made by earlier hominins, possibly Australopithecus or Kenyanthropus, creatures with brains significantly smaller than ours, with faces that looked far more ape-like than human. And yet, they made tools. Deliberate, purposeful, shaped tools. These Lamechrian tools, as researchers now call them, were large and crudely shaped, made by striking one stone against another to produce a sharp edge. They are not elegant, they are not precise, but they represent something of almost incomprehensible significance. A mind that could look at a rock and see, inside it, a useful shape that did not yet exist. A mind that could form an intention, execute a physical plan, and produce a result that matched, however roughly, the internal image it began with. That is not a small thing. That is the beginning of technology. The Oldowan tool tradition, beginning approximately 2.6 million years ago and lasting for an extraordinary 1 million years with relatively little change, produced small sharp flakes and the cores they were struck from. These tools were used for cutting meat, cracking bones to access marrow, and processing plant foods. They were made by Homo habilis, one of the earliest members of our genus, whose name literally means handy man. But the real revolution came with the Acheulean tradition, beginning approximately 1.7 million years ago. Acheulean toolmakers produced the hand axe, a teardrop-shaped tool of such consistent symmetry, found across Africa, Europe and Asia, spanning more than 1 million years of human prehistory, that it has been called the Swiss Army knife of the Paleolithic. Here is what makes the hand axe extraordinary. It is symmetrical not just on one axis but on two. It is shaped with consistent proportions that go beyond what is strictly necessary for function. Researchers have debated for decades whether this symmetry served a purely practical purpose or whether it reflects something else, an aesthetic sensibility, a standard of quality, a form of communication about the skill of the maker. Some researchers believe that the hand axe was, among other things, a display object, that its beauty, and it is beautiful in the way that any well-made thing is beautiful, was partly a signal. I made this. Look at what I can do. If that is true, then the first tools were not just technology. They were the first art, the first resume, the first signature, and every time you reach for a well-made object and feel the quiet satisfaction of something designed precisely for its purpose, you are having an experience that stretches back, unbroken, 3.3 million years. The hand that made the first tool and the hand that holds your coffee cup are, in the deepest sense, the same hand, still reaching, still making, still finding satisfaction in the simple, ancient miracle of intention made physical. Think about the last time you donated blood, or had blood drawn, or watched a small cut on your finger bead up in that familiar dark red. There is something arresting about it, something that stops you for just a moment, the sight of your own interior becoming briefly visible. Now imagine that the blood moving through your veins carries, encoded in its chemistry, messages from ancestors so ancient they lived in a world unrecognizable to us. Messages about immune responses, about altitude tolerance, about the metabolism of certain foods. Messages written not in language but in the precise molecular grammar of DNA. Shared blood, in the genetic sense, is the most intimate inheritance in existence. In 2010, the publication of the first draft Neanderthal genome changed everything we thought we knew about the relationship between our species and theirs. The research team, led by Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, found clear evidence that modern humans and Neanderthals interbred. People of non-African descent today carry, on average, between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. 1 to 4% may sound small, but consider that the human genome contains approximately 3 billion base pairs, and that 1 to 4% of 3 billion is somewhere between 30 million and 120 million individual genetic letters, each one potentially influencing something about who you are. More remarkably, the Neanderthal DNA that persisted in modern human genomes is not randomly distributed. It is concentrated in specific regions. Genes involved in immune function appear frequently. So do genes associated with skin and hair characteristics and with the metabolism of certain nutrients. These were not random accidents of interbreeding that survived by chance. They were adaptations, features of Neanderthal biology that were genuinely useful when early modern humans moved into the environments that Neanderthals had occupied for hundreds of thousands of years. In other words, when our ancestors arrived in Europe and Western Asia, they were newcomers to a challenging environment. And the Neanderthals, who had been there for somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 years, had already worked out some of the biological solutions to surviving in it. When the two groups interbred, those solutions transferred. Our ancestors, in a very real biological sense, borrowed adaptive wisdom from the Neanderthals and carried it forward. The Denisovan story adds another layer. Populations in East Asia carry approximately 0.2% Denisovan DNA, but people of Melanesian and Aboriginal Australian descent carry up to 5%. And in those populations, a specific Denisovan gene variant has been identified that confers an advantage in processing oxygen at high altitudes. Tibetan people carry this gene in high frequency. It allows them to live and work at elevations that would cause serious health problems for most humans. This gene was not independently evolved by Tibetans. It was inherited, passed down from Denisovan ancestors through interbreeding that occurred tens of thousands of years ago. We received a biological gift from people whose faces we have never seen, whose language we cannot hear, whose lives are accessible to us only in fragments of ancient bone. This is what shared blood really means. It means that the boundaries we draw between us and them, between our species and theirs, between the modern and the archaic, were never as clean or as final as we told ourselves. Life found connection across those boundaries. Life passed something useful through them. And we are here in part because our ancestors were willing, or at least able, to love across a difference that we once thought was absolute. Your blood carries that history, quietly, faithfully, every heartbeat moving it through you, 3 billion letters of an ancient, shared story. Let yourself consider this for a moment. Think of the wisest person you have known in your life. Not the most educated, not the most successful in any conventional sense, but the person who seemed to carry the most genuine understanding of how things worked. The person whose counsel you sought, not because they held authority, but because they had lived through enough to know something true. Now think about how much of what they knew came from people you will never meet. Their parents, their grandparents, teachers, neighbours, communities of lived experience that accumulated and compressed into the particular wisdom you were lucky enough to receive second-hand. Now extend that lineage back through time until the names disappear entirely. Our unknown elders, the ancient human beings who lived and accumulated knowledge and died without leaving a name behind, are perhaps the most significant and least acknowledged contributors to what we are today. Paleoanthropologists studying the life histories of ancient humans have found evidence that old age and the care of old individuals within communities goes back much further than was once believed. For a long time, it was assumed that early hominins lived short, brutal lives, that reaching 40 or 50 years of age was exceptional, that the elderly would have been burdens in a survival-focused group. The fossil evidence does not support this assumption. At the site of Cima de los Huesos in northern Spain, remains of Homo heidelbergensis individuals dating back approximately 400,000 years include several individuals who appear to have reached mature old age by the standards of their species. One individual, known as Cranium 5, shows evidence of a severe congenital deformity of the skull that would have caused significant cognitive impairment throughout life. This person survived to adulthood in a world with no medical support, which means others supported them. At the site of Shanidar Cave in Iraq, the Neanderthal individual known as Shanidar I, approximately 40 to 50 years old at death, had suffered a crushing injury to his skull that left him partially blind. His right arm had been so severely damaged that it had withered and was effectively useless. His right foot showed arthritic damage that would have made walking painful, and yet isotope analysis of his teeth suggests he ate the same foods as others in his group for years after his injuries. He was fed. He was included. He was kept alive. What does it take to care for someone who cannot contribute to the hunt? What does it take to feed someone who cannot gather? It takes something we think of as distinctly human: compassion that extends beyond immediate practical benefit, a sense that a life has value independent of its productivity, and critically, it takes a recognition of what an elder offers even when they can no longer perform physical tasks. Knowledge, memory, experience. The accumulated understanding of where the water is when summer dries the usual sources, which plants appear after specific weather patterns, how previous difficult seasons were survived. The unknown elders of human prehistory were not simply surviving in their communities out of others' charity. They were, in all probability, central to those communities' survival. The grandmother who remembered where the tubers grew in a drought year, the elder who had navigated a particular mountain pass decades before and knew which route to take, the experienced hunter who could no longer run but could read animal behaviour more accurately than anyone younger. Modern research into the evolution of human longevity strongly supports this idea. The post-reproductive lifespan of humans, particularly women, is extraordinarily long compared to other primates. Evolutionary theory holds that natural selection generally does not favour the survival of individuals past reproductive age unless their presence increases the survival of their related descendants. The fact that humans routinely live decades past reproductive age suggests that those extra decades were, over evolutionary time, worth something real. Our unknown elders were not simply old people, they were libraries, living archives of the knowledge that kept communities alive through difficulties that no individual lifetime was long enough to fully prepare for. Every time you benefit from the wisdom of someone older, every time you receive knowledge that you did not have to earn through your own painful experience, you are receiving something your species has been passing forward for hundreds of thousands of years. The chain of transmission is unbroken. The unknown elders at the beginning of it could not have imagined you, but in a very real sense, they helped make you possible. Notice what happens in your body the next time you are startled: a car horn when you did not expect it, a shadow moving suddenly at the edge of your vision, something falling. Before you have formed a single conscious thought, your body has already responded. Heart rate spiking, muscles tensing, breath held, eyes wide, the entire system oriented toward the source of the surprise, ready. You did not learn to do that. No one taught it to you. It simply happens, faster than thinking, because it was built into the architecture of your nervous system by pressures that have not been fully relevant to your life for a very long time. Ancient instincts are not metaphors. They are living biological systems operating in your body right now, shaped by millions of years of pressure from a world that no longer entirely exists. The human stress response, the cascade of neurological and hormonal changes triggered by perceived threat, is one of the oldest systems in the mammalian brain. The amygdala, the small almond-shaped structure deep in the brain that plays a central role in fear processing, is present in all mammals and in many other vertebrates. Its basic structure has changed relatively little in 100 million years. When you feel fear, you are activating a system that was ancient when the first primates climbed into the trees. When that fear subsides and your body settles back into calm, the settling mechanism is almost as old. But ancient instincts go beyond fear. Consider the instinct to look at faces. Human infants within hours of birth preferentially track face like patterns over other visual configurations of similar complexity. They have never seen a face before. They have received no cultural instruction. The preference is built in, because for the entire span of human evolution, faces were the single most important source of social information in the environment. Reading faces was survival. Consider the instinct toward fairness. Research using economic games, where participants can choose whether to share resources or keep them, has found that human beings will consistently penalize unfair behavior even when doing so costs them personally. Across dozens of cultures, the same pattern emerges. We would rather lose something than allow an unfair outcome to stand unchallenged. This instinct, researchers believe, evolved in the context of the small, intensely interdependent groups in which our ancestors lived for most of their history. In a group of 150 people, chronic unfairness is a threat to the cooperative relationships that everyone's survival depends on. The instinct to resist it, to call it out even at personal cost, serves the long-term health of the group. Or consider the instinct toward music. No human culture ever discovered lacks music. No human being is neurologically incapable of responding to rhythm. The preference for certain harmonies, for the resolution of musical tension, for the emotional lift of a rising melody, these responses appear to be universal in ways that strongly suggest they are rooted in something ancient, built into the auditory processing system during a period when the social uses of music and rhythm were critical to group cohesion. Ancient instincts are sometimes inconvenient in a modern world. The same stress response that kept our ancestors alive in genuinely dangerous environments now fires in response to a difficult email or a crowded subway. The same instinct for fairness that served social cohesion in small groups now inflames political polarization in societies of millions. The same drive toward calorie-dense food that prevented starvation on the savannah now contributes to metabolic disease in a world of permanent abundance. We are ancient animals in a new world, carrying the equipment of one context into a radically different one. And the friction between our ancient instincts and our modern circumstances is not a flaw to be corrected. It is a feature to be understood. Because understanding where these drives come from, recognizing that the fear in your chest is 300 million years old and not simply your personal failing, that the craving in your body is a survival system and not a moral weakness, that the longing for fairness and connection and music and belonging are not soft preferences but ancient biological necessities. Understanding all of this changes the way you relate to yourself. Your ancient instincts are not obstacles. They are your inheritance. They are the reason your ancestors survived long enough to become you. And they are, even now, doing their ancient best to keep you here, in a world they were never built for, but are still, faithfully, trying to protect you from.